My voice is not good. Okay. Everybody, we're going to start. Thank you so much for coming. We the people too tonight. We are a group that's formed because we noticed that most groups just were a gathering of similarly minded people that want to get together and complain. We want action. We need all hands on deck to make sure that we all ride the red wing and get qualified, conservative patriots in office. This is paramount. What they've been doing to our school children, the horrible, unconstitutional mandates. I could go on forever. Nobody wants to hear me babble. So, without further ado, I would like to start with the prayer. Ms. Jennifer, right here, wherever you're comfortable is fine.
God of wonders, beyond what we can see, we ask for your help today. We thank you so much for our speakers who are going to give us a word. We thank you that you are able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we could ask or think. So we ask that you order our steps and take us to a victory. We ask that you keep us safe as we come and as we go. We thank you that the food will provide nourishment, and we thank you for this time. We bless your name. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Without further ado, the pledge. Anybody volunteer to lead us? Ms. Feinberg.
Hi, I'm Lisa Feinberg. I'm President of the Republican Women of Howard County. I'd like to lead us all in the pledge. And I have a loud voice, so I will yell over the rock and roll, which we have asked to have turned down, by the way. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Just some boring business. We have a volunteer secretary. God bless her. Our prayers for input. She's been extremely helpful, and I'm very thankful. We're still treasureless, but I will give the lame treasure report. We have $1,206 in the bank with an expenditure of $156 for our P.O. box. So without further ado, Christy, would you like to give a quick update on Bonds for the Win?
Hi everybody, I'm Christy McLeod, and I've been working with Bonds for the Win. At the last meeting, I gave an update where we had kind of hit a brick wall because we were trying to get the actual policies from the state, and nobody was really able to get it, whether it was verbiage or we were just reaching the wrong people or whatever. But I was actually able to finally get all 3 policies, which covers 19 counties. But then right after that, then they dropped the mask mandate. So pretty much nobody's really done anything. Nobody's filed any claims or anything against any of the BOE members. But this I can tell you, within the past couple of days, the head person for Bonds for the Win, her name is Mickey Clan. She's working on something else right now for kind of like, part 2 of all of this. I'm not sure exactly what it entails. We do have oaths of office for all of the elected officials, including, sheriffs, county council, county executive, et cetera, et cetera. So we are still working on something. I don't know exactly what that is, but I just wanted to let everybody know. Okay? All right. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd like to give the candidates around the room the opportunity to stand up, give a brief hi, and so they can let you know who they are, so when they are elected, we don't abandon them and we hold them accountable and stand behind them when they fight against the horrible policies that we need to have removed from legislature all over the place. So, shall we start with Mr. Eurypsy Morgan?
Hi. So nice to be here. My name is here of C. Morgan. I'm an attorney. I used to be on WBAL, did the midday show for 5 years, and I just recently left to run for Congress. I'm sure you all saw that the maps changed yesterday about 7 p.m. And I changed as of about 9 a.m. this morning. So I am now running in District 3. It's Anne Arundel and Howard County. I'll just tell you very, very quickly. Both of my parents were immigrants. My dad is from Mexico. My mom fled the Civil War in El Salvador. They came to this country with absolutely nothing except the belief that education is what gets you forward. And so my siblings and I, all 4 of my siblings and I, went to college. My youngest brother is a welder and he does really, really well, but I will tell you that education is absolutely key. And the fact that so many people have forgotten that they're not treating our children the way that they should in terms of education and making sure that they know how to read, write, do basic math is atrocious. And I think that's what's bringing about the demise of the American dream. So I look forward to running for Congress. I look forward, hopefully, to earning your support. Please take a sign, and I'd love to talk with you afterwards.
Hi, I'm Lisa Feinberg, again, running for Central Committee of Howard County. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Brown, and I'm running for the Republican Central Committee in Howard County as well. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Maverine Robinson and I'm running for State Delegate District 13 against Guy Guzone, who is the incumbent. And I just want to share with you all a quick story. Just today I heard 2 sad stories. One from a parent who pulled her child out of Howard County Public Schools just after Christmas break because of some things that were done to her that made the child cry all day, and just some other things. The child was being indoctrinated even in the Mandarin language course. Go figure. And also some things from another school where a child was thought to have been sexually assaulted by another student, and the school didn't report it. I am running because those things are affected by our state General Assembly, and we need people who will stand for what's right and will bring common sense back to Howard County, and for publicly saying that parents have their right to parent their children and to be involved in the school system, and to not think that they have to be followed through an indoctrination system. So I'm running against Guy Guzone. It encompasses parts of Howard County, parts of Anne Arundel County, and I hope that you all will vote for me, and I'll certainly call you when I have signs.
Jennifer running for Howard County Council, District 2, Columbia, Long Reach, Open Mills, places that they have declared there's no way a Republican should even be there. So I'm looking at a miracle and I believe in them. So I have cards if you can help donate. I need 125 people to register so that I can get public funding, and I will not be stressing over that. God is able.
And I'm running for the Board of Education. It's one of the at-large seats that are up for this particular cycle. There are 2 that go all across the county. I'm stepping up because I'm very, very concerned that our children belong to us. They don't belong to the teachers union, and we want to make sure that we are returning just to core. We're asking just teach core subjects. All the values can be done at home. We're perfectly capable of doing that. Thank you. I look for your vote.
I'm Beth Retaliata Lawson. I'm We the People Too, as well as Howard County Republican Women. I am also running for Howard County Central Committee. Republican women, of course. And without further ado, we have
Michael Perucca. If a nation...
Sorry, he's the one that's going to put that, you know what, to kick these people.
I like it. If a nation desires to be ignorant and free, it desires what never was and never will be. Thomas Jefferson, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, wrote to a friend, he said, if a nation desires to be ignorant and free, it desires what never was and never will be. Which really echoes something that comes from the Bible, Hosea 4:6. It says, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. We don't know what we need to know, and it's not a mistake, it's not an accident, it's not a coincidence that we don't. We've been led away from knowing our own history and our own heritage. Jefferson talked about 5 self-evident truths in the Declaration of Independence. The fourth of which, well, let's talk. The first was that there is a God. The second was that our rights come from Him. The third was that the purpose of civil government is to protect those God-given rights. And then he said that in a righteous government, it's done by the consent of the governed. The consent of the governed is necessary for a government to be righteous and to be true. And the consent of the governed is actually expressed in the Constitution. The Constitution is the vehicle by which we consent. We say, here's the powers that you have, government. Here's what we want you to do. And here's all that you can do. So the Constitution, you could say that if the government stays within the bounds of the Constitution, then it has the consent of the governed. But when it leaves and it does things outside of that Constitution, then it's losing. It's acting outside the consent of the governed. It loses its credibility. It loses its authority. If Governor Hogan suspends, the Constitution of Maryland creates the office of governor. It's created by the Constitution. There would be no office of governor but for the Constitution. So if the governor suspends the Constitution, what does he suspend as well?
His power.
His own authority, his own legitimacy. We have gone through 2 years of ridiculous, obnoxious lawlessness from the very top of our government. And I don't care what you thought of the science. I personally thought the science was self-contradictory and ridiculous and strained and a twisted, logical kind of thing. However, even if you believed all the science, ladies and gentlemen, it was still not lawful. None of those things were lawful. The mandates, the lockdowns, the declaring some businesses non-essential, etc. None of that was lawful. And none of that was lawful because it's directly prohibited by the Maryland article of the Maryland Declaration of Rights, which is part of our Constitution. Article 44 says this. I want to try to say it from memory here. Article 44 says that the provisions of the Constitution of the United States and of this state, being Maryland, apply as well in times of war as in times of peace. And no deviation therefrom or violation thereof based on a plea of necessity or any other plea is valid. So no plea of necessity like pandemic or fake-demic or whatever you might have thought of it is valid, or any other plea. So none of these things were valid. And ladies and gentlemen, unless this is redressed, then we don't have a Constitution and we don't have a rule of law. This needs to be redressed. That's why I'm running for Attorney General. I ask you to look at my campaign card, which costs money. I'd like you, but the important thing is I'd like you to go to the website and learn more about what we're about. These things need to be redressed, ladies and gentlemen, or else we don't have a Constitution, we don't have a rule of law. So please remember, by the way, if you don't know, how many people have ever read the Maryland Constitution, please? If you haven't, ladies and gentlemen, then you don't know. I don't mean to chastise you. Yes, I do. I do. If you haven't read that, then you don't know the rules of the game. And how can you expect to prevail in the game if you don't know the rules? So 2 things I'd like you to take away from this. They say the result of effective speech is action, not just a warm, fuzzy feeling. So if you go home and do nothing from what I say, this is a failure for me. So there's 2 things I'd like you to do. Number 1, learn your Constitution. Read the Maryland Declaration of Rights. Know these things. And secondly, please consider voting for me for Attorney General of Maryland.
We are all about action. The next gentleman we have had action taken against him. He was the PTA president at the top magnet school in Northern Virginia. Thomas Jefferson, correct?
Yes, Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology.
And wow, Mr. Dr. Harry Jackson.
So how much time do I have? Because I've got a long story.
Talk quick, brother.
Talk quick, okay. All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Harry Jackson. I was the former president of the PTSA, Parent Student Teacher Association, at Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. It was the nation's #1 high school for the last 2 years by U.S. Science News Report. I was also a member of the diversity committee of that organization. I'm also the vice president for the Fairfax County Association for the Gifted. And I am a parent advocate for parents defending education. And yesterday I got a call from Governor. I was also involved with Governor Youngkin's campaign, Educators for Youngkin, and yesterday I got a call from them asking me to accept an appointment seat for the Board of Education for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I'll give you the story about my origin story, okay? And don't forgive me, but for going up for most of my life, I considered myself left of center and a Democrat, okay? You gotta forgive me for that one, okay? But it took this election to actually, again, when it comes to CRT, I think that's one divisive concept that tries to tear us apart. And I think we have a lot more in common. So it was very easy for me to take simply a step over to the right, and that's exactly what I decided to do. And yes, I am getting attacked. For those of you that have your phones, you can take a look at the Daily Wire. You'll see that there's a case where they're trying to criminally prosecute me for libel and slander because I called out at a PTSA meeting 2 years ago an activist that was in the meeting, didn't have a child at the school, trying to get a child alone and trying to get access to other middle school children. And I called that out, and other parents took action, went to the principal responded to it. But because this person had a Twitter war with me and I referenced that in that tweet, they decided to try to prosecute me under an obscure code under Virginia statute for under a chastity statute. Of course, we all know that the current president, Justice Jackson, not related to me, isn't a biologist, which you can't discuss on what is or is not a woman. But I did accuse this person of not being an unchaste woman. So let's talk about this whole concept of CRT, and this is a nationwide movement. Why it's so important? Why does the Democratic Party wants to use this and get rid of standardized testing, which standardized testing really is the answer to identify where the gaps are in the system. And what you'll find is that in a lot of communities, what they've done is that they've degraded course quality to such an extent that the courses do not align with standardized tests, which is why as a child you can have an A or a B and then get destroyed in an international test, which is the case that happened with Thomas Jefferson. When my son was class of 2026, and when the news came out of the new admittees, he was one of 6, but yet it was falsely reported that there were no black children admitted. I had to stand up and say, whoa, this isn't right. And then I came across some of the CRT activists. They said, we need to change, get rid of school, go to a lottery. And then what was really interesting, a little bit about my background, as I said before, I had a little bit of a leftist upbringing. My mother was a 40-year Department of Public Welfare servant in the state of Pennsylvania, so I'm very familiar. I've traveled a lot of these areas. My father, obviously self-made, grew up in South Philadelphia, poor, took a test, went to Central High School, became a judge, was also one of the first black lawyers to graduate from the University of Pennsylvania during the Civil Rights era, so I heard the stories. But now I'm actually living and experiencing it. Now I saw what's going down Thomas Jefferson. It was blatant anti-Asian discrimination. So then I said, okay, well, you should talk to the NAACP about this. Now, you would think that they would do something about this. So you want to know my moment in truth, okay. I got kicked out of an NAACP meeting. It gets better. I was only one of 3 black people in the meeting. Exactly. So, you'll see an article I wrote, "Do the white and woke actually represent the best interests of the black community?" So what they did is that over the last couple of years, and I was talking to the president before that, his name is Kofi Annan, he's coming on my show, Education Matters. Back then, when they came, you had a lot of leftists that came in, took over the Democratic Party, took over the NAACP, and now they're parroting the Democratic narrative. So whenever you see an NAACP chapter speaking, it's not the black community. It's basically the white and the woke that are speaking on their behalf. And that's where you see not only critical race theory, there's critical gender theory, where you see books like Gender Queer. Has anyone heard about this? Yeah, page 135. Yeah, so, that's the one, right? It shows, it's children, so I won't give a graphical description of what it has, but that crosses the line. That's blatant pedophilia. So when this was all occurring and I was running the diversity committee, we had our school board members saying that we have Asian parents paying $15,000 a year in test prep, and I immediately knew that's BS because I was on board. I was also on the board for FCAG, Fairfax State Association for the Gifted, so I knew exactly what all the systems were, all the external providers what they were doing. There was no way a parent would be paying more than $3,000. But mostly all of them have scholarships because I actually was able to host a conference where all of them offer free and reduced services for students that are in TJ caliber. I also work with the Black Student Fund that is also dealing with sexual children in the DC, Maryland area, and they're trying to expand their footprint in Northern Virginia. So Wow, that's a lot. How am I doing on time? Doing great on time. Okay. So I was on the diversity committee, and I hold this conference. It destroys the narrative that parents or those that are not well off can't succeed. I'm like, gee, really? You're not liking what I'm talking about? Black president, someone black telling you about this. And they said, well, what about single parents? But bring up the Black Student Fund, and most of their scholars are from single parent households, and they go on to get master's degrees. They're not liking what I'm hearing. It's like, we're not the victim class. So then I get elected. Remember, I'm one of 6 black parents, and it's a majority minority school, mostly Asian. I get overwhelmingly elected as the first black president of this PTSA. And immediately, before I even take office, we're put on probation by the Virginia PTA, which is led by 2 failed Democratic politicians that failed to get elected for office. Pamela Croom and Jenna Alexander. So, and then immediately from the onset, they tried to force me out to resign, which I ended up having to do because basically they had a coup. So there's a lot about that online. So why do we need to vote? Why do we need to save America? Why is education and it's amazing that for some reason they think that when parents don't get involved that things don't happen. Parents got involved in Brown versus Board of Education. When parents get involved, things happen, things change. We saw that in Virginia. It went from blue to red. It's probably going to stay that way. When they start talking things in Virginia, this is nationwide, they talk about Virginia Mathematics Pathway Initiative. That's getting rid of all advanced math, all the way up until grade 11. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. They basically want to lower the ceiling and point children towards the floor and prevent them from excelling. That is wrong. That is un-American.
Is algebra and above considered advanced math?
Yes, it is. My daughter's in algebra 2. She wouldn't be able to take math for 2 years. In Loudoun County, which are our next neighboring county, we have kids that are in geometry. If they took geometry in 7th grade, they can't take a math in 8th grade.
Ow.
Yeah, it's called holding people back.
It's coming.
It's coming. It's coming. It's already happened in Virginia, and it's coming to Maryland. And this is basically the hill that we have to die on. This is why we have to fight this ideology that's forcing equal outcomes. Not everyone has equal ability, and that's okay. But you don't say, we're going to force you to an equal outcome. And that's the problem with what their narrative and what they're pushing. And that's why it's so dangerous. Now we talked about the prosecution we mentioned before, what's happened with me. And I mentioned before the case where I now have to appear in Fairfax District Court on Friday, where I had an activist because they wanted to go groom a child. So I'm like, no, I'm not for that. And then it also goes back. Look at Azra Nomani's Substack tweet where it talks about where I called out a lot of these books, genderqueer specifically. I even had a show on board where I had members from the LGBTQIA plus community, and we talked about both books, Law and Boy and Genderqueer. You know, Law and Boy, they're like, well, it's towing the line. It's like, okay. But then when I go to Genderqueer, they're like, oh no, that's straight pedophilia. That does not need to be in the library. And this is what they're putting in school libraries, in areas in libraries where children as young as 10 or 11 can get access to these books. And it's clearly pushing the boundaries. It's pushing the boundaries of what children should understand, what is acceptable touching, which we all teach our children. And they're pushing that boundary. And not only that, but they're doing it in a manner that's very deceitful, and they're trying to groom parents to get trust of these people, and we can't do it. We have to hold them accountable. So in my estimation, teachers, education, the teachers union in particular, they're having a watershed moment. I mean, the law enforcement community experienced this in the 70s, the intel community as well. They are accountable to the public, and we need to hold them accountable. So I'll be around here. I don't want to take up the entire time, but I can answer questions.
Please answer.
Sure, absolutely. Anybody have any questions for me?
Thank you.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Why are they doing it?
Control. Keep us divided. I mean, think about it. What do they say if you're anti-CRT? What's the first thing they want to call you? Right? They want to call people a racist. Being anti-CRT is not racist. CRT is seductive because it addresses two things: institutional racism and inherent bias, which I think most reasonable people would agree that has existed in our country, or may exist to some extent. But these other elements of CRT are absolutely poisonous. They're attacking virtues and values, meritocracy, individuality. They're calling math as being merit. If they're calling you able, you're calling you racist. If they're calling you attractive, they're calling you racist. I mean, they call even military children racist. And I'm retired military. So, I mean, I did 20 years in the Navy. So, I mean, there's a lot of problems with CRT pedagogy. It's a framework that is a pathological framework that restricts reason. And I think it's like with anything, it's being pushed because they want power. But As we saw with COVID, that was what really woke everybody up. When we saw what they were teaching our kids, when you're sitting in a classroom and you hear a teacher say, "Hey kids, have your parents step out of the room so they don't hear what I'm about to say." What? Hey, what? Excuse you? Exactly. We all, think about that, right? I mean, I'm a lacrosse referee. I also do football. I've been doing lacrosse for 18 years. I don't say anything in front of a child that I wouldn't want the parent have to see. I don't talk to kids unless the parent's there. I do the same thing when I do sports as a scoutmaster. But yeah, I think they thought they were going to win votes for this for some reason.
Win votes.
I don't know. This is bizarre. I mean, it really is. And not only that, but you have other movements that are trying to attach themselves to the struggles of the black movement. That's when we start seeing like the big push for the gender queer theory, this transgender, trying to push parents out of the classroom. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can go ahead and finish.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see.
I think I answered.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a number of us here in Howard County actually filed with our county police officers, or police department, based on 2 state laws and 1 federal law where genderqueer and lawn boy cross the line clearly as pushing pedophilia to children.
Right.
We were never, at least that I know of, none of us in the group were ever contacted during the investigation, but we received or saw a letter from the state, or our county Board of Education superintendent, saying that the state's attorney conducted an investigation and has determined that there is no pedophilia, and the school system will continue to provide these books.
Wow.
My question.
I will add on to that and say the only reason we found out is because I did an interview for WCBM back in November when we originally did the forum. They sent me an email including that memorandum from Dr. Martirano. Otherwise, nobody would know.
But here's my question.
Yes.
So generally speaking, we have an attorney here, we have people here, very knowledgeable people here. What's our recourse legally?
I would say legally, a couple of armed parents, because one, pushing pedophilia or grooming material under the guise of education is a federal crime, it's considered grooming. Yeah, so I did a show on education matters, we talked about 2 books. The argument for Lawn Boy, there might be some wiggle room, but genderqueer, definitely. You look at pages 135 to 137 in that book, it's a slam dunk. For your school, I would look at their inclusion library. There's typically 2 policies that follow a standard pattern throughout most libraries. One, books are supposed to encourage lifelong learning, okay, amongst students outside of lifelong. Do these books meet that threshold? Certainly not. The other thing is that for representation, so people can see books that represent themselves in the library and connect to it, but not every book connects with each student. Now, does that say like you get rid of, because the counter argument from the gay community is that, well, you're just holding our material to a higher threshold, and no, you're not. When you talk about genderqueer, pages 135 to 137, that goes under Plato's Symposium. I can't talk, sir. All right, so Plato's Symposium is basically, she can't hear me, right? Not paying attention? All right. Plato's Symposium is basically the construct of when you would have Greek soldiers that would take boys to be used for their pleasure, okay? That's the context of it. And in that book, it actually has material. You have another child, a teenager, who is fantasizing about that scenario happening. And pages before that, where she's, exactly. So that, yes, pictures, it's graphical. Oh yeah, there's pictures, yeah. Instructional material, yes, how to. Not only that, but other material. So absolutely, what educational value does it have? In Loudoun County, our county right next door, they were able to get it out of the books, Fairfax. I'm working on it. I'm meeting with church leaders later on this week to talk about it. I'm actually going to discuss it. Hopefully I can raise awareness that should get shut down. It's getting shut down elsewhere. In Pennsylvania, they're pulling books from the libraries too. And what was really disturbing in Fairfax is that there were a lot of parents that would go to school board meetings and say there's no pedophilia, blatantly lying. And I'm just like, okay, this is what it has here. Like everyone's like, they don't know how to react to it. But yeah, I think that's something to fight over, especially genderqueer. That definitely has to go. Yes.
I read genderqueer cover to cover in one sitting, so I know what's in it. Just in general, can you give us some tips? Like, what can the people in this room, citizens, do? Some of us have children in school, some of our children are out of school, we're grandparents. What are some tips that we can do to activate?
To activate?
Please.
Wow. Well, who would have thought that, school board meetings were a place to go to, right? That's where we start talking amongst one another, right? I mean, that was, is parental involvement. For some reason, there is this push of, it happened in Virginia, of trying to push parents out of the classroom. And that's a no-go. Or now you start hearing under the name of equity where they try to limit the ability of PTAs to advocate for their children. And after my experience with the Virginia PTA, I would not be joining a PTA, I would be forming a PTO, parent-teacher organization, because the PTAs, for the most part, they're parroted, they're kind of infested by teachers' unions, or even get rid of the teacher altogether, just make it a parents' organization. I would be forming that. Speaking up at your school board meetings, and speaking. But it does come with consequence. In Fairfax, Virginia, they have activists that will actually sit there that support the school board members that will perform dossiers on people that speak at school board meetings. It sounds crazy, but Merrick Garland signed a letter calling parents domestic terrorists. Wow. Right. Yeah. And outside of school board meetings in Fairfax County, they had DHS police cars and helicopters above it. There was no credible threat, or no credible reporting. But it wasn't until that was released by the Daily Wire that go away.
Thank you.
So you mentioned you have a radio show.
A TV show on usanow.tv, Education Matters.
And where do you find that?
usanow.tv.
Okay.
I just wanted to say something real quick to everybody in here. I don't know how many of you are parents or not, but the Maryland State Department of Education does what's called a Maryland State Survey every single year. And I received an email, actually it came through Canvas, through my daughter's email at school. She goes to Mount Hebron, she's a freshman, for this mandatory survey that all of these kids need to take. I had posted something on Facebook in a parents group. A teacher had responded because I said, what is this all about? And he responded back and he said, yeah, here you go. Here's this document specifically from the state. All teachers, because teachers have to take the test too, not all teachers, they have to sign an NDA. I don't know what is going on. That's shady. Right, a non-disclosure. So I called the school last week and I spoke with one of the vice principals. I said, what is this all about? And he just kind of sugarcoated it. And I said, well, here's my concern. I said, my concern is that all these teachers that take the test and or administer this test all have to sign NDAs. I said, that's shady, like something's going on. I do not feel comfortable with this. You do not have my consent for my child to take this quote unquote mandatory survey. I said, what do you need from me so that she doesn't have to take the test? He was like dumbfounded. He said, let me get back to you. Never got back to me. So then yesterday, I emailed him this very nice, lawful looking email stating certain laws and whatever, and basically told him again in written, I said, as the legal guardian, you do not have my consent. And I said, I hold you personally liable to make sure that she goes to student services or, a counselor's office or somewhere else when everybody else is taking the test. So then he responded back and he said, okay, that's fine. So she's not taking it, and her response, so I told her what she needs to do tomorrow when, everybody else is taking the survey. She was like, good. That's just one less survey that I have to take. But, so then yesterday I also sent a PIA to the Maryland BOE to get a copy of that survey. A PIA is a Public Information Act, where you can request information and...
There's a Fairfax in Fairfax, Virginia.
Yeah.
We unfortunately were able to get access to it. It basically is a sex, drugs, and rock and roll survey where it's asking how many partners your child has been with. And it's really bad.
Yeah.
So as you organize online, I do want to mention, because Maryland does have this problem, and this happened when I wrote an article in Fairfax under their social media monitoring policy. The justification for social media monitoring was to identify threats within the school environment of an active shooter that might be going on in school. That's the justification. But you have to look at the RFP, the request for proposal, when they contract out for these services. Now remember, I'm a retired intel officer. I taught at National Intelligence University. I taught cyber intelligence in their MSSI program. I teach cyber intel in another number of other universities. So, and I'm a human collector by trade. So when you look at the RFP, it literally goes through all 5 steps of the intel cycle. When you start looking at what their target is, they said anything to the Fairfax County brand. Well, what do you mean by brand? Well, it could be anything. It could be initiative. It could be a policy. Now, the intel community, you have oversight by the Inspector General. You can get in trouble if you start spying on U.S. citizens or even members of the Five Eyes. Law enforcement has to be a probable cause. You can't do that. So they basically, essentially, they have required a RFP to actually have an unaccountable intelligence apparatus that can be politicized using open source or OSINT. And that's very scary because OSINT is not just Google. It really isn't. You have what's known as the dark web. 90% of the data is on the dark web. We use a torrent, getting databases. It's not publicly accessible, and not only that, but when you have the analytical products, there's no discussion on who they share that information with or how it's used to target parents. And we've seen parents get targeted. So Fairfax did that. The Maryland's State Department of Education also has an RFP for the same capability, using the same language. So you might want to take a look at that as well. It's very broad and it's very broad. School boards do not need to be in the business of intelligence collection. That's why that's why they partner with law enforcement. So that is something to be aware of.
So who would, under the proposal, who would pay for that?
It's the taxpayer, right? It's being paid for.
And that would be subject to any, is there like a citizens review panel or oversight or something?
I'm glad that you asked that question. When I looked at it for Fairfax and for Maryland, no, there wasn't any oversight. When they ask you, for example, in the intel community, you have what's called intelligence community directives. So you have ICD 207 where something has to be tradecraft compliant. You actually have to show what analytical standards you're using to make this assessment. There is none of that. There is none of that fidelity within these proposals. So these aren't trained analysts. So you're trained in the intel analyst. It takes about 8 years for someone to be a subject matter expert in a particular area of their field. They don't even go there. So it's the Wild West. In Fairfax, the RFP was for $200,000, which really isn't a lot, but it could really grow. I don't know how much they actually are willing to award for Maryland, but it's kind of like the camel's snout getting into the tent. Once you get it in there, you hire a company like Northrop Grumman or Palantir. Let's have some of these social network analysis tools. I mean, things can get really scary pretty fast, particularly when they're trying to identify true name. For example, they want to identify true name if you have a social network alias. To identify who the person is behind that name in your network associations. Developing dossiers on parents and other things, that, particularly parents, because it was for teachers, it also includes parents of who may be critical of the brand or a threat to the brand. And they do throw in there threats to physical threats to teachers, facilities, and students. But then they throw in, it can be any threat to a brand. So like in Fairfax, we have one Fairfax. Well, if we don't like one Fairfax because it's CRT, where are they going to push that elsewhere? What other initiative?
So who would have to approve that? Does that have to go through a judge? Does that go through the county executive?
No. This is like
board and executive secretary?
No, this is just like this is standard government acquisition. I mean, it doesn't go through that type of.
Well, that's the capability, but the actual people that they would be, creating dossiers on or whatever, the targets.
The targets of citizens. Any threat to the brand.
Who would nominate somebody to be a target for that collection?
Well, each of us who filed a complaint.
Basically it's a contractor that's trying to follow on work or expand a capability. I mean, you guys have a huge military-industrial complex area here. I'm a contractor too. We know how it works, right? Hey, you're happy with this service, we can also do this. Oh, you're going to give us this option here,
Yes, but if you're saying that they're going to look into people who are maybe testifying before the Board of Education they don't like and do open source collection.
Well, you've had.
How do they know who behind the scenes who they're looking into?
Okay, so in Fairfax, we actually have 2 activists. I'll say their name: Jorge Tarico and Vanessa Hall, that are followed by school board members, and they go after targeting parents and they go after targeting organizations. In Loudoun County, they go after Ian Pryor. They go after Moms for Liberty. They go after parents that go up and speak up at these school board meetings and find out who they are. They go after Nazar Nomani. Those are, the parents that are allowed. But again, they're also talking about identifying specific parents that are teaching. So, they have, school board members do work with activists outside of in unofficial capacities. You just go
Yeah, but you're talking $200,000 taxpayer resources.
in that case, but you're talking 200,000. What happens when it becomes 20 million?
It could easily become a lot larger.
Yeah, once it becomes 20 million, that's when you have a really scary capability. You do have school board members or teachers that will call a child protective services on special needs parents when they complain about their children being abused. So what happens if they create a dossier or they do a targeting package? I remember, you know, I'm a human targeter. I was a human targeter, so I do a human targeting lead and human targeting package. Human targeting lead takes me about 8 hours to do. Human targeting package is about 20 hours of research on a specific person, identifying the placement, access, and accessibility, and all their networking associates. And I can bring that to a collector. It's like, this is a person you should collect, you should actually target. Well, what if you misuse that for a specific purpose and you hand it to a police department? Remember, there's no collection capability, and the worst thing about it, it's not trade craft compliant. And in the RFPs, they mentioned that the vendor does not have to release the proprietary process of which they use to collect that information, and they collect multiple data sources that tie into student services. They can use your kid as a collector, which, you know, in the black world, that's fair game, right? But you're also supporting a mission, a national defense mission. This is a school district. Why are they doing that? Yes.
Before you scare everybody into non-action, I just wanted to make
okay, sorry. No, that's why we have to have action.
a parent body not ready to do anything. I just wanted to mention that because the more you say, the more people are like, oh my God, what could they do to me on my taxes and all, like the fear factor. But critical race theory comes from critical theory. It's a Marxist movement. It is here. We all know that. They infiltrate the schools. It started in the colleges. Now it's in all of our schools. And their goal is to lie about our history and all of that, make them hate this country, but also to separate the children from the parents.
Yes.
And so we all know that this gender and all of this issue is in these books. It's all about sucking your kids away from the parent, the family, and completely destroying the family unit and faith in the United States. And thereby it will take down the country piece by piece. But Moms for Liberty really is a great organization. And I don't have children in the school district, but I'm passionately and wanting to be engaged with other parents because there is strength in numbers. Moms are tough and we can come at this together, but I don't have a network here. I'm not part of the group. If somebody wants to start this fight and start to do it, there are organizations that have the wisdom, have the blueprint. Moms for Liberty is a fabulous one. DailyCloud.io with Dr. Naomi Wolf has a webinar with a lawyer who helps teach you how to sue your school boards. And I'm in a private school, so you can't really sue school boards in a private school, but you can in public schools. So there's a lot of weaponry out there for parents. But one of the things is to connect and create your organization of strength. And there's strength in our numbers.
Well, you do have the issue of the wokeness doing infiltrating private schools as well.
Oh no,
I mean, Flint, we can talk. Yeah,
it's
Flint Hill.
It's in mine. I just can't sue my school board.
The other thing that's about this thing is that there's resistance across communities. It does not have broad support. Definitely not in the black community. When I talked about genderqueer, Law and Boy, the NAACP, the NAACP, they started putting out flyers saying how we support this material. I went to every black church, I went to every black barbershop, and nobody black showed up to any of these rallies. I mean, it got shut down. I mean, really fast. I had the former president, when the majority black contacted me, we actually worked together on this issue. They don't, in our area, they don't have a presence in the black community, they don't have a presence in the Hispanic community, but yet they are very confident that they think that they can actually speak for those communities. So I would encourage to reach out to the leadership in that community, start having those conversations, because they're making it's almost like a UN intervention, right? To legitimize going into another country. If there's international support for it, it kind of legitimizes it. And the Democratic Party seems to use like the NAACP to legitimize any action that they take. They can't do it to the Hispanic community because there's a language barrier or any other group. But I would say to reach out to other members, other community leadership, and really start having a talk about it, like with genderqueer, because first of all, they're not going to read the book, but when you start pointing it out, having a discussion with them, they're going to be like, what? Absolutely not. You know, absolutely not. I'll hang out, yeah. Absolutely.
And like I started with, we are about action. Next we have the Northern Virginia contingency, because in so many ways they parallel us. Let's take steps based on what they did. If it's happening there, it's going to happen here. It's like cancer. Metastatic gross cancer that will infiltrate. But this gentleman from Northern Virginia is taking action. So let's have a round of applause for Nathan Brinkman. And he's so devoted, he even brought his beautiful daughter.
The bunny ears over there. She loves Easter and bunnies. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's so encouraging to see a crowded room of folks banding together to push back against the insanity that it sounds like you're contending with, just as we are in Northern Virginia. You heard from Harry. He's just phenomenal, and I can't tell you, as a Virginian parent, how thrilled I was to hear that we're going to have Harry's boys on the Virginia Board of Education. It is desperate. Thank you. You made my night, made my week, month. I hope you make my year. I just beg you to start taking a hard look at Arlington Public Schools, because it is a hot mess, and that's a charitable characterization. I do have a third grader, as you can see, in the audience, and I've got a sixth grader at home, and ever since kindergarten, they've been in the Arlington Public Schools system. I had no illusions about the jurisdiction's leanings. It's decidedly left of center, deep blue county, but until recent years, it wasn't totally unhinged. I think a lot of it started in reaction to the 2016 election. I remember getting emails to parents from the Arlington Public Schools system referring to the events of last week. It was reminiscent of references to 9/11, you know, and they immediately went into full resistance mode and started sending out press releases and authorizing the expenditure of dollars on lobbying against the agenda of the new administration. And it just seemed to me that they were losing their focus. They're getting a bit out of their lane, so to speak. As a parent, I'd like my school board focused on core academics and, of course, school safety. Although back in 2016, I didn't think of my public school system as particularly unsafe. Now, things have changed, and I believe it is the logical result of this ideological drift that seems to have started in response to the 2016 election, which they did not like, and then in the summer of 2020, it just went into overdrive. We started getting emails, as I imagine you folks here did, talking about how the school district is committed to combating systemic and institutionalized racism, which on its face is laudable, but the more you listen to them, the more you understand they're looking at it from a very narrow ideological perspective. I remember getting an email from my children's elementary school principal. I doubt she wrote this email. I haven't FOIA'd this, but I would not be shocked if every principal in the district was presented with this letter and told to put their name on it. It certainly didn't sound like the principal that I knew and still to this day respect. My kids' elementary school, although it is under the jurisdiction of the school board, for a while felt almost like a charter school. It was an oasis of relative sanity in an otherwise very progressive district. But even that has been chipped away at from the school board. This school of choice that you have to enter a lottery to get your kid into, it's called Arlington Traditional School. And as the name suggests, It was less enthralled with ideological trends, and it stuck to the tried and true. It always emphasized phonics, for instance, when the rest of the district was focused on what they would call whole language or balanced literacy. And as a result, by focusing on proven academic instruction coupled with an insistence on good behavior and character, they created a school culture that was the gem of the district. And I would contend one of the best public schools under the jurisdiction of a school board in the country. I feel like it's losing that competitive advantage because the school board saw this center of excellence, which, by the way, basically eliminated the so-called achievement gap along demographic or racial or ethnic lines, which has vexed school districts around the country. You would think that a school board would look at this example in their own district and ask, well, what are they doing right? How can we replicate this? But instead, they want to make this school more like the rest of the district. I presume for ideological reasons. It just wasn't as progressive from their perspective, and therefore it had to be made to assimilate to the rest of the district. And as Harry said, during the COVID years, which coincided with the social upheavals, the woke revolution of 2020, this school just went into overdrive in terms of wokeism. And I really was in for a rude awakening when I toured my son's new middle school. Middle school orientation day. I went to the parents' presentation, the kids had their own presentation, and the principal was very boastful about this new emphasis on social emotional learning. We're going to have SEL instruction twice a week, and it's going to usher in this new era of peace, love, and harmony. And it was presented as the panacea for all that ails our traumatized students. You hear a lot about trauma now following the pandemic. I would suggest that a lot of the trauma, insofar as it exists, was inflicted by the very people that are now citing trauma to justify their woke agenda. But anyway, that's what they were talking about. So I approached the principal following the lecture, thanked her for her time, and said, well, how can I learn about this SEL stuff? What are kids going to be taught? To this day, I've not been sent any meaningful, substantive information. I can tell you that while a lot of it sounds innocuous, and perhaps a lot of it is, they've definitely incorporated trendy politics, a lot of talk of equity to include the internet meme with the ladder and the people looking over the fence. You may have seen this circulating in Twitter. It's out in the public domain. And so when my son told me about this, I sent an email saying, oh, I'd like to see what was presented in this lesson. And I was told, no, we can't share this because it's copyrighted. Oh, really? An internet meme is copyrighted? There's got to be something from this lecture that is not copyrighted. If you have to redact it, fine. You know, send me the redacted version. So far, I've got nothing. But really, that's the least of my concerns now. But just to give you an idea of how woke and how heavy-handed the propaganda is in this middle school in Arlington, Virginia, named Swanson Middle School. As I toured the halls following the lecture and the welcome from the principal and the administrative leadership team, I started snapping photos because seemingly at every turn you saw what I would characterize as hard left ideological propaganda. A lot of it had the names of leftist organizations. And when I say hard left, I don't think I'm embellishing. Every school now in Arlington Public Schools has what they call an equity coordinator, whose job, it appears, is to promulgate leftism to students. Just imagine if there was a non-leftist or a conservative version of that, like patriotism, virtue, and free market coordinator, right? It's just incredible how brazen and how open they are about their ideological proselytizing. Well, anyway, on the door of this equity coordinator's office, and he's given a very nice office. Among other things, he had a poster that jumped out at me, and it had a quote, and it said, "You can jail a revolutionary, but you cannot jail the revolution." Now, this quote was layered against a red background, and the image of a raised, clenched fist. So I just had a sneaking suspicion that wasn't a reference to the American Revolution. Like this wasn't Thomas Jefferson or George Washington. So I took a picture and I later Googled that quote. And sure enough, it's attributed to a self-identified Marxist-Leninist by the name of Fred Hampton, who, by the way, died in a shootout with police, which I guess gives him street cred among Arlington Middle School educators. And I found the entire speech from which that quote was taken. It's apparently one of his more celebrated speeches in Marxist circles. And in fact, I found the transcript of the speech on a website called, I believe it was Marxism.org. And immediately following that "you cannot jail the revolution" line, immediately after he said, "Kill a few and you'll get a little satisfaction. Kill some more and you'll get some more satisfaction. Kill them all and you'll get complete satisfaction." And then he, rants and raves a bit. It's an expletive-ridden speech, by the way. F-bombs, N-words, galore. I actually counted them up. It was well into the teens. And he concludes his speech by saying, "And what we are after is complete satisfaction," harkening back to that "kill 'em all" line. Evidently, this is what passes for motivational rhetoric in Arlington, Virginia's Swanson Middle School. And I'm afraid that isn't a one-off, because I started paying more attention to what the official Twitter accounts of this school district were tweeting. And just the other month, Williamsburg Middle School and the Arlington Public School system, in the context of Black History Month, they were very proud of a poster that the staff put up in the halls for all the kids to see, and it was trying to inspire them, ostensibly, and it said "lead like," and it had 3 examples of African Americans from U.S. history, one of which was Angela Davis. Wow. Another radical, much like Fred Hampton, 2-time nominee for Vice President of the United States on the Communist Party USA ticket in 1980 and 1984. Someone who actually colluded with Russia, to borrow a phrase. She was the recipient of the Lenin Prize. She was very chummy with Soviet and Eastern Bloc dictators. She also was accused and stood trial for being an accessory to murder because she bought the guns that were used in an attempt to liberate some friends from a courtroom who themselves were accused of murder. And in this plot, people were held hostage, people were killed, including a judge. Someone was paralyzed for life, and then she was acquitted by a sympathetic, all-white, by the way, jury. And the left, including the Soviet Union, hailed her as a political prisoner who was persecuted. And look, I'll respect the jury system, and I'll treat her as not guilty. That's what our court system concluded. But she conceived of herself, and her supporters referred to her as a political prisoner. And so, because she visited beyond the Iron Curtain at the height of the Cold War, American and Western human rights activists, including Alan Dershowitz, tried to prevail upon her to put in a good word for actual political prisoners beyond the Iron Curtain in the Soviet bloc countries, specifically Jewish refuseniks who were persecuted for their faith. And Angela Davis spurned them, saying if they're in jail in the Soviet Union or the Eastern Bloc, they deserve to rot because they're a threat to the state and a threat to the revolution. So out of all the heroic figures, scientists, genuine civil rights activists, pioneers of all kinds, trailblazers, there's no shortage of inspiring examples from U.S. history with respect to our African American fellow citizens. Angela Davis makes the top 3 according to Arlington Public Schools, really? And this is someone who's held up as a model to emulate? Just like Fred Hampton in Swanson Middle School? I find it very troubling, and I think it's reflective of a hard-left, militant mindset. So that gives you an idea of the extent of the wokeism, and you might want to keep an eye out for that in your own schools, and catalog it, snap pictures if you can, tweet it out. Sometimes these things go viral. But this wokeism dovetailed with a new approach to discipline, and that's what I'll conclude with because it's top on my mind right now for very personal reasons that I'll share. And you can Google this. Arlington Public Schools was very proud of itself for voting to defund and abolish the police in the schools. We no longer have school resource officers. And this is our first school year without school resource officers. And at the same time, and they, worked the media and got glowing coverage before the school year began about their new progressive approach to student behavior and discipline. They've abandoned traditional notions of discipline in favor of what they call restorative justice. And this, much like SEL, was supposed to usher in a new level of peace and harmony and healing and understanding and empathy in Arlington Public Schools. Well, the results are now in. It's been, long story short, a non-stop horror show, including at my own son's school, but at others as well, particularly at the middle school and high school level. Just at my own son's school, the Swanson Middle School, where the walls are adorned with leftist propaganda, there have been non-stop reports of bullying, harassment, profanity is heard throughout the school day with no disciplinary response from students. F-bombs, N-words directed at fellow students, directed at teachers, regardless of race, by the way. Sometimes black students are called the N-word, sometimes white students are. And sometimes students, including recently a special needs student with autism, was tricked into kinda sorta saying the N-word in the context of a game where they get someone to say vinegar, and then the rumor is spread that this student said that word, and a mob descends upon him, pins him against a trailer, punches him in the stomach, and his mother spoke at a school board meeting recently, and just authentic, heart-rending fashion relayed this story. And I tweeted that out. It went somewhat viral, and I since had parents reach out to me saying, it's not just this one kid, this is kind of a popular game at Swanson Middle School this year. And so I feel like, kind of like the broken windows theory of policing, if you see graffiti or broken windows in an urban environment, it sends a message. Nobody's in charge here. You can pretty much do what you want without consequence. And I think by tolerating these, you might say, lower level offenses, the profanity, the epithets, the disrespect, it leads to more violence. And we've seen that at Swanson Middle School this school year. There have been reports, some acknowledged, albeit belatedly and begrudgingly in the most euphemistic terms possible from school officials. There's been acknowledgement of some of these incidents, to include reports of sexual harassment and battery and perhaps even assault. And a principal sent out an email saying, our cheerleaders were not treated in a proper manner. That's her way of acknowledging it. But there are reports of simple assault, hitting, kicking, punching. It seems routine now in this school. And it was recently in the news. Police call records were obtained just since May of last year. The police, who have been banished from the school, have been called 22 times since May of last year. And remember, part of that, the schools were open only on a hybrid basis, and then there's summer vacation when the school's pretty much totally closed. That's a high rate, it seems to me. But what's sad is they probably were not called enough, because we hear of incidents that you would think would warrant a call to the police, assault, weapons. Most recently, a taser was brought on campus. It appears that did not prompt a call to police. And this past week as well, it came out that students were apparently making videos of each other in the bathroom and then airdropping it from their iPhones to classrooms and even posting on social media. And I gotta confirm this, but it certainly appears that that did not prompt a call to police either. And that's really shameful, because time is of the essence in situations like that, right? You want to confiscate devices, remove things from social media, and we're entrusting a school administrator to do what probably law enforcement should be doing. And to make things even worse, and I'll wrap up with this and why I feel an urgency when it comes to student safety, it turns out, according to dozens of parents that have reached out to me since I was interviewed by Fox 5 DC just on Friday about the latest revelations, the student who brought the taser reportedly has made repeated threats to shoot other students and to more generally shoot up the school. And apparently he's bullied and victimized and beat up a lot of kids over the course of the year with no serious disciplinary response until the school shooting threat. And then he used his out-of-school suspension to source a taser, which he brought to school. And now presumably he's suspended again. And parents are asking, well, what's he sourcing and plotting now? The school still has not acknowledged the school shooting threats. And parents, by the way, across the political spectrum from all walks of life, this is the People's Republic of Arlington. I dare say 90% plus of the parents that have reached out to me are Democrats. I had a half-hour conversation with a mom from Swanson Middle School just yesterday. She runs a progressive digital consulting firm, okay? But she wants a police officer permanently stationed at Swanson Middle School. As it turns out, whether you're Democrat or Republican, Christian, Jewish, atheist, in a traditional marriage, or a lesbian mom married to another woman, and I use these examples because these are real examples of fellow parents that I've talked with who shared these concerns. You'd be hard-pressed to find a parent, no matter their worldview, no matter their political affiliation, no matter their lifestyle, who wants to see their child die at Swanson Middle School before the school year is over. And so this is galvanizing parents in a way that I've not seen before. And at minimum, they want candor, honesty, transparency, proactive, accurate communication from a school that has not given us that. I mean, I could go on and on with examples of incidents they've concealed or misrepresented, but this is the threat that kids face as the result of wokeism. It's not just that your kids might be brainwashed to a worldview you disagree with. They might be assaulted, sexually or otherwise. They might be beaten up. They might even be shot. I mean, the stakes are high.
This is not going to happen here. It probably already is happening, and it's going to get worse. So,
Oh,
sure.
by all means.
But next we have Tonya Tiffany, who can actually tell us some small things that we can actually do. And thank you, beautiful bunny ears, for putting up with us.
Thank you all, and I look forward to the next presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so Harry and I are going to agree and disagree at the same time. Okay, so first, I'm gonna have a different hat on than I'm gonna have next, okay? I come from a background where I had a conservative political group. We used to hold 2011 through 2015. We would host conservative conferences in Annapolis every other year. So, have been around for a little bit, had no clue prior to 2010 what the heck I was doing. Still, I only know a little bit, just gonna say. I'm not a political activist that's paid. I just jumped in not knowing what to do because I had to do something, right? That's like a lot of us. Over the years, the trainings that I've gone to a bunch of the Institute on the Constitution stuff. That's really good. I've been through Republican conferences and stuff like that. I was president of the Republican Club for a little bit. I've been on the PTA Council on and off for 10 years now. The best training I have found is with the Center for Self-Governance. Because you can do and grab Democrat, liberals, it doesn't matter. They take away the us versus them. That is the paradigm shift that they purposely make, is to take that away. Now I'm coming at this from being conservative, being a Republican, and I'm telling you, this is the best that I've seen. They have had fantastic results with Democrats in other states. So I'm just want to let you guys know that, okay? So, I'm now putting on my PTAC hat. The PTA Council of Howard County. Now, this is where Harry and I agree and disagree, okay? He comes from a PTSA background. There are ways to utilize the PTA and the PTA Council. It's not going to get you everything you want. It's not. There will be a coup, but you can reverse the coup, and this is the time to do it. So, the PTA, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to start the slideshow, aren't I? Okay, so, why is the PTA worth the efforts? Because they are the largest advocacy voice in the country for parents and kids. Yes, it includes the teachers, but the teachers have their own union, okay? The most important thing to know is that they have and have had the largest voice for 125 years. Right now, yes, they are run by people that we do not agree with. Not the unions, but people who agree with the unions, for the most part. But that's not everybody, and that's not at the local level. So keep that in mind. All right, so I'm just gonna keep on. So the PTA has an advocacy voice at the county council, at the Board of Ed, the county council, and the state legislature. Unlike any other voice. Now, a regular parent group is easily ignored, unfortunately. Even a local PTSA voice is easily ignored. A council voice is not as easily ignored because you are representing the entire county. However, getting all of those voices to agree with you is really hard. I'm not gonna lie. It is really, really, really hard. One of the biggest benefits is for the local council level is that every single school system has policy review committees every single year. Our PTA council here in Howard County has a seat on every single policy review committee. If you really want to know what is happening and how it may or may not shift and how to change it, that is one of the ways that you can do it. This Thursday at our Board of Education meeting, probably right around 6 o'clock, is going to be the announcement of all the policies that are up for review next year. That's going to start at the end of this school year. Some of those policy committees will start meeting over the course of the summer. Just letting you know. But PTAC, we're always looking for volunteers to sit on these policy reviews. There are a lot of policy review committees that don't have a voice because we don't have the volunteers.
How do we become one?
Join PTA.
Who can become one? Can someone who's not a parent in the school?
Yes. I will get to that.
Thank you.
Okay, so a little bit about PTA hierarchy. National PTA, and then you have, for Maryland, we have Free State PTA. There are only 7 county councils in the state. We have Howard, Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Hartford, Montgomery County, and Frederick. Right down here it says, you're not allowed to take a position that is counter to one that above your hierarchy has taken. Okay? I'm upfront with that. Like I said, this is not the end-all be-all. However, this gets you a seat at the table in other fashions. What can we learn from Elon Musk? Right? He didn't like how Twitter was teaching people or was taking away free speech rights. What's he do? He could have created and looked into creating a competitive company. And what did he do? He took over 9.2% of their stocks. He now has a seat at their table. If we give up that seat at the table, it gets worse. That's one of my things. Just hear me out. Like I said, it's not the end all be all, and I'm upfront about that.
By the way, that's 14.9%.
Oh, did it go up there?
Yes. You cannot get any more while he sits on the board.
Sweet.
Good.
Okay, now, you can't get involved just for your political interests. Okay, if you're going to get involved in PTA, it can't just be because of CRT. It can't just be some, a political thing. That is a huge chunk of what they do. But the local schools need help. Everybody is desperate for help. Right now, every single PTA council, if there is one, every single state PTA, as well as national, has just formed a nominating committee and is looking for officers for next year. This is the time. If you can grab a couple of parents from your local area or also from your school, this is the time to do a reverse coup. This is the time to try and take some of that back. Now, as Harry has experienced, you are going to have a fight, right? Part of the reason why the inner cities are as bad as they are is because we fled. Because we left and we stopped having a different voice. Now, you have to be willing to be picked on, and you have to be willing to stand and fight. So, what they're looking for at our level for PTAC, the voting members, I'm not sure if I have this on this one. Okay, who can join the PTA? If you have a kid in the school, if you have a grandkid in the school, if you have a niece or a nephew in the school, if you are a local business owner, let's say you have treasurer experience, let me tell you, they would love to have a treasurer. The treasurer is the hardest position to fill at almost every single PTA. They need help. They're desperate for help. They are just looking for somebody to step up and help. Okay? Now, sometimes, depending on what your verbiage is when you go in there, if you go in hot and strong, you might get kicked off. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna say you're not facing opposition. Part of how you handle this and how you talk is gonna be very, very important. Okay. At PTAC, so this is local, PTA Council for Howard County, we have 3 voting members from every single school. There's 2 PTA Council delegates and the president. Now, most schools can't find 2 delegates. My local school doesn't have any. It's me. I'm the PTSA president for Atherton. So, you know, like every other school, you know, there is an absence of volunteers. That is one of the hugest things that I think happened when the huge feminism wave hit. All of our volunteers went to work. And all of these local organizations, churches, schools, the PTAs, they lost so much of their volunteer network. For good reason. I'm not saying women shouldn't work. I have a part-time job. But that is one of the realities of what happened. So, like I said, PTAC has a seat at the table for all of the policy committees. We testify before the Board of Education. We testify before the County Council, the Howard County State Delegation. I testified in Annapolis a couple of weeks ago. Okay? We have a voice. Legislators know us. You have to develop relationships. You have to be able to work with them, whether you agree with them or not. It doesn't mean that you have to sell out. These are all of the meetings just this month that we are attempting to watch. Okay? And this is just Board of Education and County Council meetings. We are in the middle of the budget session, and this is what we are attempting to watch. Right now, there's 3 of us. You want to talk about how easy it is to get on the legislative committee for PTAC? That right there should help show you how and why we need help. What pattern do you see? Okay, when Common Core was first introduced, the PTAC president at the time, Christina Delmont Small, hosted a forum to make sure that all sides were talked about. We didn't give a particular side, but this was our way in a very liberal, this is liberal la-la land, to make sure that parents had all perspectives, not just one perspective. When it was discovered later on, several years later, that there was a mold issue at Glen Elk High School that was being covered up, I gave a presentation at PTAC with the help of a woman, Vicki Cutronio. Where does that name sound familiar? Vicki Cutronio, later on who became the PTAC president, and then later on when she continued on at the Board of Education, helped to reestablish indoor air quality control committees at every single school. Christina Delmont Small, once she got elected to the Board of Education, was able to help fire Dr. Renee Foose, who was the superintendent at the time. Now, granted, we paid out the wazoo for it, but we got rid of a really, really bad superintendent, and that was agreed upon from both sides of the spectrum at the time. Okay? So, other things that we have done at PTAC. We have increased APFO regulations. What the hell is APFO? APFO is the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinances. You want to talk about how you fight diversity and equity? Stop overcrowding our daggone schools. This is one of the ways that we are fighting that fight in a completely different way that absolutely every single time we get unanimous support. Because if you get those kids out of the trailers and you get the school to be at 100% capacity as opposed to 140% capacity, you are already going to have a better school. But yes, you still have to fight other fights.
How about charter schools instead of just throwing money?
There aren't any charter schools in Howard County. We have private
Thanks in
schools.
parts of the PTA.
Right. Well, yes. And I know there's all kinds of problems with PTA. Like I said, I am completely upfront about that. Hold on. Do you see the pattern? We currently have 2 Board of Education members who were former PTAC presidents. Now, I don't always agree with Vicki. I almost always agree with Christina. But one of the best ways to help get elected is to sit in front of every single school at a monthly meeting at the PTAC level. Okay? Now, Free State PTA as an advocacy committee that monitors and helps to prepare testimony for bills in the state legislature. If there's no common sense voice on that committee, I believe it's now a committee of 5 people, where does the voice come from? Because it's not going to come from them. If you're able to make your case, if you're sitting on that committee, of an opposing view, you probably, I was able to do this with several bills probably about 3 years ago, where I completely disagreed and had a conversation and was able to get us to not oppose the bill, but to not support the bill. And sometimes that's the win. Because if, well, we were Maryland PTA at the time, if we had fully supported the bill, then that would have been a loss no matter what. Sometimes that is the only win that you can get, but at least we didn't give up. Okay, your words matter. One of the trainings with the Center for Self-Governance is the language of liberty versus the language of captivity. And one of the things that they teach you is how knowing your audience helps, but how you speak about an issue can either immediately set a wall between the two of you, or at least have a doorway. Language of liberty: selfless, positive, optimistic, hopeful, empowering, and motivating. Language of captivity is destructive, oppressive, hopeless, contrarian, and manipulative. And you can be a staunch conservative and turn people off just from having said the word conservative. And I know this how. My nonprofit that I was, we were MD Can. We were the Maryland Conservative Action Network. Sounds great, right? You and I, we would completely agree. You and I, we hear that and we almost automatically know, okay, pro-life, pro-legal immigration, you know, family values, traditional values. I was attending the Baltimore Black think tank for 6 months. This is a downtown Baltimore Republican group that was meeting in the basement of an African store. I was perfectly fine there, going there, thought I was building a great rapport, tried to have one of their mayoral candidates come and speak at one of my conferences. She doesn't show. I show up to the next meeting, I'm like, hey girl, what the heck? Why'd you stand me up? She goes off on me. I thought we had been having a decent discussion, it all came down to our name. She heard the word conservative and she thought immediately, because of the way that she was trained and raised, that I wanted to conserve the South and the mindset of the South. We changed our name, Maryland Citizen Action Network. That's something that you can't exactly tell exactly what it is. So that meant I was able to have conversations. That one name change had a huge, huge difference. Downsides to PTA. Like I said, I'm upfront. You will be limited to what you can advocate for because of stances that Free State PTA and National PTA have taken. Like I said, this is not the end all be all. This is a foot in the door. This is a foot in the door for policies. This is a foot in the door for trying to get common sense voices so that we don't give up what we already have. Sometimes our efforts to not have PTA or PTAC supporting, you will notice PTAC has not supported the removal of SROs. We have purposely not taken stances on major controversial issues because we know I know our audience. And our audience for the local PTAs that come to our meetings, depending on the year, could be 70-30. But we just haven't brought it up, or when it was brought up, we dealt with it at the time in a very even-handed manner. Okay? So like I said, I'm not sugarcoating anything. There are a lot of people who are of the PTA mindset, or the PTO mindset. I'm not discounting that. So, other advocacy committees. We have the SECAC, that's a Special Education Citizens Advisory Committee. They work for special needs parents and families. There's also the CAC. Right now is a hot mess.
We have plans for that, so stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned.
Stay tuned, and we need all hands on deck when the time comes. Okay, got it. More about that later.
One of the biggest lessons that I have learned over time is balance. Okay? Balance is a myth. It is very, very hard to have balance. However, if you got little kids at home, they are your top priority. You do not stay away from them any longer than you have to at night. Because there will be times, yes, they have to see you taking a stand. Yes, they have to see you active. But you have to make sure that they are still going to come to you when they're having problems at school, and not that they're going to feel neglected by you. Okay? They have to see that. But they also have to know if you're being active on their part, they have to know that they still come before the activation or activism that you're doing. They have to feel that. That's one of the reasons why next year, much to the chagrin of my youngest, who's a freshman, I'm going to be doing volunteer coaching. I'm not going to be a PTAC. I'm going to be a volunteer coach for my kids' high schools, because I know I can only handle so much without it completely overrunning my family and the way that I am with my family. And they are my priority. They are the reason why I am there. So I have seen marriages go on the rocks, and we don't want that, because that is the other way that they win. You have to keep that family together, because without that, we got nothing. But the PTO, I don't discount. And there have been plenty of times, especially when Maryland PTA was going crazy, and they had been going crazy for a really long time, and I'm glad the National broke them up because they were corrupt beyond belief.
So, what are we doing to strategize, to mobilize folks, to make this movement possible? We're networking.
The point person to organize, to have the time to organize. We need to get good candidates elected into office, be behind them, let them be our voice, and we can be there with a pitchfork, prod them forward, saying, this is what we want, y'all better do it.
One of the problems that we have had, and I say that as a conservative, is we focus on getting people elected, and then we abandon them. We don't give them the power or the activation to legitimize their stances.
Christina Belmont Small is an example of that. She's been fighting the good fight for years.
She has been abandoned, just about. She needs people contacting her with their concerns. She needs legitimacy to bring matters up to the school board. Because yes, we are facing a slew of PFLAG, GLAD, all these other organizations who are bombarding the Board of Education, the County Council, all these other groups.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter, NAACP, they're being bombarded with these requests for equity and diversity and stuff like that.
Remember who these requests are coming from. They're not coming from the black community.
No.
They are not coming from the black community. So, and, they're coming from special interest groups. And when I talk about PTAs, I'll mention something. Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology was the only school, PTA ever, to be placed on probation. You gotta look at your bylaws.
Yes.
The National PTA and the PTA have a tremendous power. They can say, we can revoke your charter and seize your assets. And they have no objective criteria in order to revoke that. So if you take the time and you review my case, our case,
You have to.
they came to conclusions without any observable, they did not observe anything, they concluded
Which
anything.
is a lawsuit. Which is a lawsuit, the only way that you can fight.
The problem I had in my school is that most of our, because it's minority majority, most of the parents do not speak English. It's not their first language. They are panicked because emotional health, mental health is a very big concern because we have very high performing students, and suicide is a legitimate concern. And and parents were concerned about this because these kids put so much pressure on themselves to excel. And they were about to take that away from them, which is why they capitulated even to agree with probation. I mean, it really is a dark chapter in our history, American history, with what they did to that school. And it's a shame what they did. But I resigned from it, and that's why I can decide I'm going to continue. That's why I'm taking on other positions in advocacy. I get it. Like you're going to run to the PTA, but I think you're going to run into the same problems that I ran into. You don't have to learn from the same mistakes I did. You do not have to go through an experiential learning process, learning only from pain. I mean, I'm a good example. Just look at what happened to me. I mean, they're trying to have single parents. I was a single parent. They want to have fathers. I'm a father. They want more minorities. I'm a minority. They shot me down. Okay? Okay?
I think we need to have you come back.
I have a question for you. You mentioned curriculum. I'm from Montgomery County, so it's different. But in Howard County, where does the curriculum come from? Does it come from the Maryland State Department of Education?
No. It comes from everywhere.
Yeah, it's a combination.
Well, because I will tell you, and I just found this out, that the Maryland State Department of Education has sent a new curriculum to the different counties. And I know Montgomery County, they are right now, they are fine tuning it and making changes. And then in July, they're going to be training the staff, and then they will be bringing it to the classroom in the beginning of the fall. And it was loaded, I mean loaded with CRT.
Yes.
There is a whole section on Planned Parenthood, and you can go to a certain section and you can actually get information. There is a part of it that glorifies Black Lives Matter organization. There's a lot of these different things, and so just beware. I think that this is a health teacher contacted me. That's the only reason I know. And she is, she was devastated. So, but I will throw in this one last thing. So obviously, county executive, that's an important person because they work with the Board of Education. This is one of the reasons why, for governor, we need Dan Cox for governor.
Yes.
Because like everything that you hear about that Bill of Rights that Florida did is a lie unless you've read the bill. I've read the entire bill. It's only 7 pages long. There's not one mention of being gay. All of it, the basics of it is that schools cannot teach pre-K through grade 3rd sexual orientation. And I think everybody in here that has raised kids would agree with that 100%. But everything that you're hearing on the media is lambasting it because they keep calling it the gay bill. But there's not one thing that mentions in it about the gay bill. Dan Cox tried to get a Parents' Bill of Rights passed. And obviously, with all the Democrats, he couldn't get it through. But basically, what I know what we want in Montgomery County, and I would assume it's the same thing you want. You want the Board of Education to be transparent, and it's a whole thing where it's the teachers, the school system, and the parents that we should be working together. As a retired teacher, I firmly believe that, and I think the fact is that schools are. That's one thing, and not in their vocabulary, they're not transparent. They don't want you to know. But I will tell you this, you have more power than you know. They don't want you to know that, but you have more power than you know.
Way more of us than there are them. We need to believe that and do that.
But we need Dan Cox and Gordana. Gordana got rid of it. She lives on the Queens County. She got rid of it in her county. And so
we can do it here too.
Yes.
Pleasantly, because we've been so long friends, the committee that looked at the budgets. Huh?
The Operating Budget Review Committee.
Yes, I don't even know if it's there. But I was very new to it when I moved and first met this young lady. Because my wife and I spent 34 years down in Montgomery County before coming up here. So we've been here ever since beginning of 2010, or late 2010, September. So that was my first inkling. And it was interesting that I can step back and say, hey, the problems are the same, because my wife was the PTA side, I handled all of the Civic Association side, I was past president 3 times of the Montgomery County Civic Federation, and we represented some 60 to 70,000 people in a given year, as far as newspaper people went. But the education was, so my wife and I talked about across the pillar. Education had to be handled in the budget, it had to be handled in all the long-range planning for facilities or anything else. I am surprised at how much the underlying politics has changed in this, and particularly in the broader Democratic segment. And people that I worked with on the council who were council members, and we disagreed, but when it came to budget issues and looking at long-range strategy and a whole bunch of things, we had a lot of common stuff in mind, and the question was getting it through. So my impression when I got done with the first time I went through that, because I think it was 5 iterations of that, then there was all kind of changing in policy of people. I'll not forget the fact that the current county exec, Sigety, and there was one other council member whose name I forgot. I was singularly unimpressed when we had tremendously good quality statements to say, hey, if you change this, then you can get this, this, and this without a budget increase. And oh, by the way, why are you squirreling away money for a reserve? And I think they all should work for the reserve going from year to year, which was over 3 times what Montgomery County has on a school system that's 3 times bigger, or 4 times bigger now.
I'm very sorry.
Good, okay.
They're
So,
trying to get out of here.
so I can just tell you that you have to stay with it. And the one lady over here who used the term common sense, I'd like to suggest very strongly, we abandon the expression common sense and go after good sense.